Well, good morning, everyone. I want to welcome everybody to today's meeting of the Environmental Quality Commission. This is going to be a joint meeting with the Oregon Board of Forestry, and so we look forward to talking to them before long. So at this time, we'll call to order this meeting on Wednesday, November 17th, 2021. And we will note for the record that all of our sitting commissioners are present digitally, at least, for this meeting. It's my habit to start the meeting by reminding just all of us what the mission of DEQ is, because that is really why we get together and do this work. And the mission simply is to be a leader in restoring, maintaining, and enhancing the quality of Oregon's air, land, and water. And I think our agenda demonstrates that DEQ and the EQC are working on that at this time. So we're getting started today with a briefing on the private forest accord. We have been working closely with the Department of Forestry and the Board of Forestry for some time to also clarify the work that we need to do together, where our authorities or our interests overlap. And so we're looking forward to this briefing. I will turn it over to you, Director Whitman.
Thank you, Chair George, and good morning, commissioners. Good morning, everyone. We're going to start out this morning with a very high-level overview of the forest accords that were recently agreed to by leaders in the conservation community and leaders in the forest landowning community as well. This is going to be a high-level overview. We've got about 25 minutes for it, so we're not going to go into a whole lot of detail. But there are written materials that describe the different elements of the agreements that have been reached. And we also could, if the commission is really interested, invite representatives of the group that reached the agreement to come back to the commission in January and provide more detail at that time. But the purpose of the presentation today is to inform the commission about this very important agreement that's been reached. It does set context for the work that the Department of Environmental Quality and that the Environmental Quality Commission need to do in terms of improving water quality on forest lands. So we wanted to provide that context for the commission before we talk about the proposed memorandum of understanding between DEQ and the Oregon Department of Forestry. So that's just a high-level overview of what we're doing. And I'm going to dive right in. I have Jennifer Weigl with me this morning, who I'm going to ask to talk about the substantive portions of the accords. I'm going to talk about the process and a little bit about what has happened so far and what we expect to happen process-wise going forward. So first of all, the forest accords describe an effort between forest landowners and conservation groups that was begun in February of 2020. And it has already resulted in a couple of significant things. In July of 2020, there was agreement on legislation that added requirements around pesticide application on forest lands, including buffers and notification for aerial pesticide application. And then in September of 2020, there was action by the Board of Forestry to extend riparian buffers for salmon, steelhead, and bull trout streams from most of Western Oregon to the Klamath-Siskiyou region. So those two elements are already in place as part of Oregon's Forest Practices program coming out of the Forest Accord process. The third element of the Forest Accord effort was an agreement to a mediated process to try and reach agreement on a range of changes to forest practice rules that would be the basis for submission of an application to two federal agencies, the National Marine Fisheries Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, for approval is a habitat conservation plan. And if approved, this would mean that everybody complying with these new forest practice rules would have regulatory assurance that they would not be subject to liability under the Federal Endangered Species Act for any impacts that their operations have on threatened or endangered species listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. So that mediation process started early this year and has gone on over the last essentially 9 months. Oregon Department of Forestry, the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Department, and DEQ all participated as technical support for the mediation, not as parties to the negotiations. And a range of federal agencies also participated to provide technical support, as did the Oregon Governor's Office. So about 3 weeks ago, the parties announced at the end of October that they had reached agreement. And so we are now going to describe at a high level most of what they've agreed to in terms of changes to Oregon Forest Practices Act. Before we go there, and I hand it over to Jennifer, though, I just want to note what comes next in terms of process. So this agreement is memorialized in quite a bit of detail. There are papers on about 9 different areas, substantive areas that the Forest Accords cover. But the next step will be development of legislation to be considered by the Oregon Legislative Assembly. And if enacted, that legislation would direct, I believe, the Oregon Board of Forestry to adopt these prescriptions as changes to the Oregon Forest Practices Act. And the prescriptions would go into effect upon that approval by the Board of Forestry. So these prescriptions are, if things go forward as expected, are set to go into effect in the relatively near future. The parties will work together then to submit this package to the federal agencies for their review under the federal ESA. And if the federal agencies approve these as a habitat conservation plan, then the prescriptions would become permanent. If the federal agencies do not approve the prescriptions, there is intended to be a sunset, and this is important, on these prescriptions of December 31, 2027. So there is a repealer, if you will, if this effort is not successful in getting regulatory assurances under the Federal Endangered Species Act. So those are the basic process steps here. Again, these are very significant changes that are proposed in protections primarily oriented around protecting fish, threatened and endangered fish species, but also some other wildlife and aquatic resources as well as watershed health. So this is directly relevant to our work, collective work on water quality. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer and ask her to just give a high-level summary of the substantive elements. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Director Whitman. And again, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Weigl, and I'm the Deputy Water Quality Administrator for DEQ. And so as Director Whitman mentioned, there were a number of areas that were addressed and are part of these agreements. And so just at a high level, I'm just going to tick through them, and then I'll spend a minute just to talk about some of the different areas just briefly. So the first area in which there was agreement was around riparian areas, and particularly around no-cut buffers and how those would be applied to various types of streams. Another area in which there's agreement is protections around steep slopes to address landslides and how both sediment and large wood are delivered to streams. Another area that was addressed is roads, both existing roads and abandoned roads. So there's a comprehensive strategy around that topic. There's also another area around compliance, enforcement, and adaptive management and governance of this process. So there are agreements about proposed changes in those arenas as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. There's also another area that addresses small woodland owners. So again, this is private forest land. So typically when we talk about this area of forestry, we're talking about both larger industrial operations, but also there's a significant component of private forest land that's owned by families or individuals that may conduct forest operations on their lands. And then there's also another area where there was an agreement around funding and mitigation dollars to be spent to help support this effort. And then lastly, an area around protections for beaver. So just briefly, I'll just talk about some of these different areas. So in regard to the riparian protections, there were agreements around significant changes that would occur that would increase the no-cut buffer widths on perennial streams. And again, one thing I'll also note that there are agreements that apply statewide. So there are increased buffer protections for both that are different, but are for both west side streams and east side streams. And there are also additional, not just around buffers, but also looking at seeps and springs that are adjacent to those streams as well, to ensure that those have some protections as well. On steep slopes, I will say it's fairly technical and complicated how these are identified, but so I definitely won't go into detail on this one. But there's been agreement around a method and an approach to identify landforms in areas where there is higher likelihood of triggering landslides. And so some protections around trying to protect those highest probability, most vulnerable sites that are within private forest lands. And in addition, there are additional protections around areas that are called debris torrent streams. So those are kind of intermittent streams, oftentimes in steep slope areas, where those areas are important for both sediment and large wood delivery to streams. And so there are some riparian setbacks associated with those, again, kind of those most critical identified debris torrent streams as well. With regard to roads, there is a comprehensive strategy that's been agreed to that addresses both existing and abandoned roads through a variety of both desktop and in-field exercises to identify where there are culvert blockages, sediment that might be delivering to stream, kind of those high risk types of roads, and a plan to both inventory and address those over a 20-year period. And again, then also on compliance and enforcement, there are a number of agreements around how that will be conducted and carried out, increasing the ability or making it a little bit easier for ODF to gain access to do inspections in order to carry out both compliance monitoring, how effective are these rules in terms of are the practices occurring and are they producing the results that they are expected to as well, and then also on the enforcement side as well. Another critical component is adaptive management. One thing I know I learned from sitting in on these conversations is that while there's a lot of good data and information, that data and information is not perfect, and we're able to do a lot with GIS tools and field verification, but there's a lot of methods that continue to improve, as well as scientific knowledge about how best to approach some of these things. So there is a whole adaptive management governance approach that has been agreed to manage both research and subsequent action on that information over time. Another area, again, is the small woodland owners. Often these landowners are in really important places in the stream network in the watershed, they tend to be a little bit lower down and often are the interface between forest lands and other types of more either agriculture or urbanized areas. And so often they are in a location where those riparian conditions can be really important for fish and other aquatic life. And so, but these lands are also quite vulnerable to being converted to other land uses. So recognizing one, small landowners, often individual families, they on average harvest much less frequently, and they also occupy an important part in the watershed. There, it was recognized that there are some different types of both incentives, outreach, and other types of things that are needed both to ensure that there's good participation in the program and that we get the best kinds of protections that can exist on those types of lands without disincentivizing those lands to be converted to something that may pose a greater threat to water quality. So part of that proposal is for ODF to establish a small woodlands owner actual program and staffed to be able to do that outreach and carry out the types of programs that the agreements that were reached here. There is also, as I mentioned, funding and mitigation that's been agreed to and proposed. Industry agreed to contribute $5 million a year for mitigation. It's also proposed that the state contribute $10 million per year. Obviously, these things will also need to be taken up through legislative means, but those are the types of dollars that came to an agreement that would be necessary and needed to do some of the kinds of work that are described here. In addition, there was a number of resources identified for the Department of Forestry and other areas, and also ODFW has a place on this for some elements of some of the data collection and data keepers of some of the information that were identified as necessary to be funded and established within those agencies. And then lastly, there are some protections for beavers, so things to help mitigate potential trapping and killing of beaver on private forest lands, and some ways to help mitigate when beavers can be present a nuisance to some of the work that's trying to be done there. So there's some additional protections that have been identified there. The last thing I'll say is with regard to DEQ, there are a few roles that have been identified for DEQ. There's a few places in here where part of the agreements note consultation with DEQ on particularly critical locations, whether it be for culverts or some of the landside areas, and in some of the governance structure for the adaptive management, DEQ would have a representative to the what's called the right here, adaptive management. Oh gosh, I've got the acronym, adaptive management program committee. And so DEQ would have a seat at that table. I'm going to go ahead and pause there. Richard, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, thank you, Jenny. That was great. Let's see if there are questions from the commission.
Don't see any yet. I guess the only thing I might offer at this time is, I guess, first of all, a sincere statement of thanks to all the parties who have been working very hard on this for some time now. Private industry, as you said, small woodland owners, environmental advocates, people who care about our fisheries, who are probably all those folks. And state agencies, and then also with an eye to the reality that an HCP has to head off to federal agencies as well. So there's been coordination there. This is no small task, and we know that huge investments of time and political capital and hard work has gone into this. And I think it's a point of hope for us and our work together. And we're of course going to discuss here before too long our MOU and where that does and doesn't fit with this work. But I really appreciate the overview. And I guess too, we expect from the overview that Jennifer's provided and the materials that we've seen, that there are going to be a lot of very important benefits to our streams and rivers in regard to riparian area protection, appropriate road closure or modification or maintenance. And yet we also do know that this is moving towards a habitat conservation plan. So it's very focused on biological needs of certain species, aquatic and related riparian species. And we know that our work is DEQ and EQC is focused on Clean Water Act implementation. So there are ways in which this is going to be extremely beneficial. And then there are ways in which we know that we're going to have to keep working with our partners at forestry to look at those areas where perhaps we're talking about non-fish bearing streams that could have Clean Water Act implications, but may not have been addressed, or at least not to the extent that might be necessary for Clean Water Act compliance. So really extraordinary work, very, very exciting. And we also know that there's a lot of work yet to come. Vice Chair Barrasso.
Thank you, Chair George. And I similarly just appreciate the update and just appreciate the folks coming together and making something so at this scale so monumental, and certainly feels like a once in a many generation opportunity to work on these issues and in the ways that we hope these issues are worked out. So I really appreciate the update and appreciate getting and seeing where this continues to go. It is just hearing all the range of issues, Jennifer, that you just spoke to. It speaks to the scale and the approach we need to take in solving complex issues because they are complex. And I also appreciate the specificity with which folks are going into this. I want to just kind of, as this moves along, I just would love to stay in the loop and updated to understand those opportunities where there is that, I think what Chair George and others have spoken to, that very direct overlap with our work. And then understanding where that sort of that gap, some of those gaps may show up. So that frankly, we have an ability to be a collaborative partner. So I'm appreciative that DEQ gets to have a seat have a role in this because it's tremendously important to our agency's work, and it's great to see that folks within the communities, both forestry and environmental communities, have come together on this.
So thank you, Vice Chair Barrasso, Chair George, and I want to be respectful of the time since we've got the Board of Forestry joining us as well. Again, we'd be happy to come back to you in January and do a more detailed presentation on the elements of the accords. That would probably be done not by us or led by us, but by actually some of the parties who helped negotiate this agreement. So with that, unless there are any questions, Chair George, I'd suggest we go ahead and transition to the joint meeting.
Yes, let's do that. Let's welcome our partners from forestry, and it'll be great to have this joint portion of the meeting.
And Chair George, this is Stephanie Caldera, your commission assistant. I am bringing in our Board of Forestry members as well. We have our state forester and other staff from Department of Forestry. They will all be brought in as co-hosts, and it'll take just a second, Chair George.
Sounds good.
And Chair George, at this time, I do believe I have all of our forestry board of forestry members, as well the appropriate staff who have been assigned the co-host rights for this item.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our partners at the Board of Forestry. Welcome to our new state forester. Welcome, Chair Kelly. It is great to see you all and to have you here today, and to talk about something that we've been working on together for some time. So as I mentioned earlier, we have both the wonderful convenience of Zoom, and it also presents a few challenges. So just a minor housekeeping note. Chair Kelly I think the Board of Forestry runs fairly similar to the EQC in terms of recognizing speakers. So we should probably just pick somebody to recognize speakers. And do you have a preference for how we handle that?
Sure. I think you should handle it.
That's what I get for asking, right?
Yes, of course.
All right, thank you, Jim. And then the other, again, blessing and curse is I can't pin everybody I probably really want to see. So please, nobody hesitate to raise your electronic hand or say, excuse me. All right, little glitch in the recording, but that's okay. So just don't be shy. Be sure to let us know if we are not seeing you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Director Whitman and our State Forester. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair George. And if I could just start by welcoming Cal Mukamoto, our new Oregon State Forester. Cal, you and I haven't had a chance to connect yet. You're brand spanking new. This may be your first public appearance. So welcome. I look forward to working with you. Obviously, we've crossed paths a little bit in the past. You've got a great background for this challenge with being State Forester, and we look forward to spending time with you and working together.
Well, thank you, Richard. I really appreciate it. It's been a while since we worked together, and I look forward to working together some more. So, but good morning. I want to say just a couple words. I'll keep it short because this is my first week. But good morning, Chair George and Chair Kelly, commissioners and board members. This is, of course, I said to mention, this is my first week as State Forester, and it has been a whirlwind of making testimonies, meeting people, and discussing issues. But you know, I looked at the calendar and I said, "Oh my gosh, here's a bright spot on my calendar." Not to say there weren't other bright spots, but this was one of them. And when I started to dive into the MOU, I found a document that focused on accountability and transparency, efficiency by better alignment between the two agencies, and it was inclusive of public input. And it clearly defined the roles and responsibilities of the two agencies in dealing with water quality. But you know, I also found a document that I felt was timely. With the Private Forest Accord, it provides greater opportunities to protect water in Oregon. You know, 30 years ago, and I think a board member, Brenda McComb will remember this, I was the coordinator for the Indian Forest Management Assessment Team, which was a congressionally mandated team to evaluate forest management on Indian reservations throughout the United States. And one of the members of that team, Dr. John Gordon, observed that, you know, tribes should have management of their own lands because they live with the management decisions they make. You know, come 30 years from that time, and now we're dealing with climate change, wildfires, greater populations. And so we all bear the responsibilities that we make on forest lands. Our actions or inactions affect us all. So with that thought, I am therefore looking forward to moving on to signing this document. And I thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. So I'll hand it back to you, Richard, or Jennifer to take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Cal, and very well said. Great vision for the work that we have to do together and with partners in terms of conserving our forest and making sure that our forest operations are sustainable and meet all the objectives that we've got for these beautiful lands here in Oregon. So well said. And before we plow into the presentation on the MOU, I just want to say a short word of thanks to Kyle Abraham and Jennifer Weigl and their respective staff who have worked so hard on this MOU for 2 years almost now. We've worked on this MOU for a long time. And there is a sense of urgency, I know, in staff, I think in both the agencies, to move on with the MOU and actually get into the work of working together to protect our waters, our fish, our lands. And so I am looking forward to that and looking forward to a new phase of the agency's partnership as we do this work together. The Forest Accords will help us with that. And I'm just very thankful again to these two leaders and their staff who have supported them through this work. Thank you. So with that, now that I've set you up, Kyle and Jennifer, take us into it, and let's walk the board and the commission through what we hope is this final draft of the MOU between the agencies. I will say this is a living document. You know, last time we went 23 years from the last MOU, and I don't expect that we're going to go 23 years without changes to this MOU. So I do want to say right at the outset that part of the reason we want to get going is because we do view this as a living document, one that we'll need to improve and tweak as we do this work together and find out what works and what is not working. Okay. So Jennifer and Kyle, please.
All right. Thank you, Director Whitman. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair George and Chair Kelly, and nice to meet you, State Forester Mukumoto. We're really pleased to be able to be here this morning, and between Kyle and I will walk you through the final product and our public involvement and what we heard from that and the revisions that we made to the MOU from what was put out for public review in early September. So I will go ahead and cover the first few slides, and then I'll turn it over to Kyle to do the second half of our presentation today. So first, I just want to start off a little bit by discussing kind of what our objectives are here with you today. What we want to do with you, board members and commissioners, is to consult with you on the final MOU prior to signature by the DEQ director and the state forester. The final MOU you have in your board packet, as well as a comment summary and responsiveness summary for what we received during the public comment period. So as Director Whitman mentioned, we've been working on this for a couple of years. And over that period of time, we've come to you a number of times to give these bodies, our board and the commission, updates and overviews of our agency efforts to chart a course for this more efficient and effective working relationship that's culminated in this MOU. In addition to providing updates in this forum, we've also consulted regularly with the board and commission chairs and the liaisons to provide updates and seek input throughout this process as well. So today we're going to, as I said, we're going to focus our time on describing the public process and the input we received, the revisions that we've made to the Memorandum of Understanding, and what comes next with regard to the agency's work going forward. We also will have time for questions and discussion with the board and commission. So please feel free to ask those either as we go through these slides, or we can save those to the end as well. Okay, next slide, Stephanie. Okay, so as Director Whitman mentioned, the current Memorandum of Understanding dates from 1998. And so importantly, it is outdated in a number of important ways. It doesn't reflect changes that have occurred over the past 2 decades that's relevant to forest industry and operations. It doesn't reflect the latest science and understanding about the relationships between water quality and various land uses and practices, and what those water quality impacts are to the endpoints that we're looking to protect, which include everything from aquatic life to drinking water, et cetera. And they're not reflective of how the agencies currently operate their regulatory programs. There have been a lot of changes over those 2 decades that are not reflected in the current Memorandum of Understanding. We've been working on this, as we noted, since 2019, and we've regularly engaged both the director and the state forester, the board and commission chairs and liaisons, and provided regular updates. The agencies have also been engaged, our management and technical teams, at a detailed level to understand each other's work better and to also discuss and identify how this work could be performed better, both in terms of how we carry out our required programs, but also leveraging the expertise that each of our agencies have. The last 2 years, I just want to acknowledge these have been really busy times for both agencies, for both DEQ and ODF. We've both been engaged in wildfire response and recovery work. We've continued that engagement with state and federal agency partners on the nexus between water quality needs and salmon. There's been, as we just talked about, a lot of intensive work to support the private forest accord discussions and agreements. And I will say particularly on ODF's part on that. The agency has been charting new plans on the agency's climate efforts. All of these things have been occurring and have been on the agency's respective plates, kind of not, I don't say in addition to this work, but it has I think a lot of that work that the agencies have been doing on all those fronts have helped inform how we approach this MOU. We recognize that there's this whole sphere of work, and maybe it's not explicitly detailed in every bit of this MOU, but those have been opportunities for us to understand, particularly I would say in the wildfire recovery area, and some of our conversations that have occurred both as we've been working on the MOU, but also through the private forest accord, to better understand where those opportunities and nexus points are between the two agencies. So I think, while it's been 2 years, we've also learned a lot of valuable things that can be applied as we move to implement this work going forward. And I would say, in addition, these efforts have also underscored the need and urgency for this work. There are a number of pressing and urgent environmental issues that both agencies have that are common in our respective concern about the need for work in that area, including addressing and mitigating the effects of climate change, efforts to reduce the impacts of wildfire, how we approach recovery post-wildfire, and ensuring that our forested lands protect our vulnerable species and sources of drinking water. Both ODF and DEQ play crucial roles in carrying out their responsibilities, where restoration of water quality and riparian conditions are foundational to addressing or mitigating these sources and effects, and particularly where Oregon's iconic salmon species are imperiled. We both share and agree that it is essential for DEQ and ODF to collaborate, for us to engage effectively and efficiently, and to contribute respective expertise in each other's processes, and to reconcile our technical analyses and conclusions associated with water quality and practices that are sufficient to achieve water quality outcomes, including achieving water quality standards. So as a result, our objectives have been throughout this is to ensure that at the end of the day, we are working toward our shared goals of clarity and transparency for how we work together at all levels, for agency staff, for agency decision makers, for landowners, other environmental interests, and the general public about the steps that will be taken to improve water quality if standards are not being met. And so to that end, DEQ and ODF released the draft MOU at the beginning of September for public input based on the work that we've done so far to get that additional input and specifically ask questions around, are the goals clear? Are the processes clear? Are there major gaps in terms of what's being addressed in this MOU? Next slide, please. So as a result of that process, the agencies received 621 comments. Of those, there were 27 unique letters and emails. There are 570 plus copies of an organized email. The commenters that we heard from included various environmental, advocacy organizations. We also heard from, excuse me, advocacy organizations and political organizations. We heard from agencies. We heard from landowners and forest operator community. We heard from the Coquille tribe. And we also heard from various individuals that didn't have any particular stated affiliation, but had a particular interest in this work being done. Next slide, please. So the comments that we received broadly recognize the need for the agencies to have an updated memorandum of understanding. We actually did not see any comments who discouraged this work amongst the agency. We did receive a lot of comments about how they thought we should do it, but we did not receive any comments that said we should not be doing this work. So the comments that we received, the kinds of things we heard were some comments, that offered and asked for clarification on various aspects of the MOU, and cited a need for urgency in the agency's actions. And where people were talking about urgency, frequent topics that were highlighted included climate change and impacts to drinking water. Some commenters also advocated for the inclusion of additional history in the interactions and efforts between the two agencies in our programs. Others requested additional specificity on how particular decisions would be made, the roles of the agencies in various interactions. And then some commenters specifically asked about adaptive management, reasonable assurance, and development of implementation plans. Some comments expressed concern with how the agencies described our interactions or did not agree with how we articulated our authorities and interrelated and our related interactions. And so, for example, some commenters thought the interactions that were described in the MOU were inappropriately deferential one way or the other, and in some instances thought that there were some areas that implied consensus between the agencies before something could move forward. And I will say in our responsiveness summary and also in some of the edits we made to the MOU, we tried to clarify where we thought there had been some misunderstanding in terms of intent or process. We did have one commenter ask that the MOU be clear that the actions described in the MOU would be carried out in compliance with cultural protection resource laws, which we did add something to that effect in the MOU. And so those were a number of the comments that we received. We also, I will also note that we drafted the MOU to focus on our current requirements and authorities and to address how the agencies will interact and carry out those programs. We did also receive a number of comments that were out of scope, including suggesting or requesting that the agencies do things that weren't currently within our authorities, or that those authorities be changed. And so we did receive some comments of that nature that went outside of the scope. We also received a number of comments that asked for additional granularity. And again, we kept this MOU at a kind of an operational level, and intentionally did not get into a lot of granular specifics within the programs and how those would be carried out. So there were a number of other comments about, things related to specifics of the TMDL process, how DEQ convenes and selects members for TMDL advisory groups. There were other questions about the Coastal Zone Act reauthorization amendments, CESARA. There were also a number of comments about ways in which people explicitly thought climate change should be included in here, along with water quality and quantity, other questions around drinking water. So these were some of the things that were either outer scope or kind of addressed a level of granularity and level of detail that was not intended with the MOU. Not to say that some of the things that were asked about are not within the scope of the work that the agencies intend to carry out and collaborate on, but rather it was more around, excuse me, things that probably would have doubled or tripled the size of the MOU and taken a considerable amount of time to get to that level of detail. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kyle to pick up on the next slide and talk a little bit about the revisions that we have made both in response to comments and further consideration within the agencies.
Thanks, Jennifer. Glad to be here today. Chair George, Chair Kelly, members of the commission and the board, State Forester Mukamoto and Director Whitman. For the record, my name is Kyle Abraham, currently serving as the acting Deputy State Forester for this process. And just wanted to thank some of the staff that have been working through this along those 2 years. It's been, quite an interesting process as we've learned quite a bit about our sister agency and, ways that probably we didn't expect, which is good for us. And hopefully that's been mutual. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the revisions to the MOU and next steps. So based on the comments that Jennifer just provided and some great input from the agencies and the EQC board and chairs and liaisons, we did make a number of revisions to the MOU. We condensed the info on history rather than adding more there in order to stay forward focused and acknowledge the urgency of the action needed, including within the MOU. We also made attempts to make the MOU more simple and clear in its description of the agency's work. So there were aspects of the MOU that were probably came out of different phases of the collaboration between the agencies, and some of those were redundant in descriptions and benefited from additional clarity. We also added a Tmdl Flowchart, which I'll talk about in a minute. And this is an area for change for the agencies in depicting how the agencies will interact, collaborate, and make decisions with an eye towards increasing transparency for both the agencies and the public. We've also committed to ongoing documentation of implementation collaboration decisions. DEQ and ODF have spent a significant amount of time at the manager and technical staff level working to understand aspects of our programs and came to the conclusion that moving this process and work forward expeditiously is preferable over spending more time working on defining the processes in more detail. Rather, the agencies have committed to documenting those processes and decisions as they go and as they work on real world issues. We will make amendments and append the MOU where that makes sense. Currently, the agencies are working on implementation planning for the Willamette Mercury total maximum daily load, which is a really good example of how we are already working better together. We're also going to learn from these processes and will adapt as needed. We've committed to regularly update the board and the EQC on progress implementing the MOU. And if there are big issues that we identify as we continue to work through this, the next steps in this process, that will be a part of our report out, and we'll look at the MOU and those changes. Next slide, please. There is a significant amount of effort being expended by both of our agencies with regard to climate change, wildfire, and protection of drinking water sources, as Jennifer noted earlier. The MOU has added language recognizing the urgency of these issues, as well as the fact that these elements are included as part of the work described by this MOU. There is other active work related to these topics that also bring in other relevant agencies. Examples include ODF&W with respect to wildfire recovery and Oregon Health Authority with respect to drinking water source protection. Our smoke and air quality folks for wildfire effects and our climate programs and efforts that span more than water quality and more agencies than ODF and DEQ. We also added a collaboration principle on adherence to relevant laws, including cultural resource protections. Next slide. So here's the flow chart that we developed. And this was initially focused on the critical immediate work. This flow chart depicts the many potential opportunities for collaboration between ODF and DEQ at key points in the total maximum daily load development and implementation process. The blue boxes represent key steps in DEQ's processes. Green boxes are ODF opportunities to participate, many of which are coupled with parallel opportunities for ODF participation in the more formal advisory committee processes. The left column represents total maximum daily load development steps, and the right half depicts total maximum daily load implementation and the interrelated adaptive management process for gauging and improving progress as we go. We'll also note this flowchart developed was specific to ODF and DEQ's interactions, but most of these steps have similar types of work being conducted that bring in expertise and data by other entities as well. So this process was in effect trying to condense even more what we developed through the narrative and looking for those opportunities for engagement between the agencies. For those folks that are maybe more visual than preferable to the narrative. Next slide. So next steps. Following this meeting, the agencies will prepare the MOU for State Forester and DEQ Director signatures. The agencies are committed to doing the work together. We at ODF did receive authorization for a position which will help us with the bandwidth needed to engage with DEQ on total maximum daily load development and implementation. There's also been a position recently hired at DEQ that broadens their capacity to engage with external partners. And so with that, we're really looking forward to getting out and really test driving this process as we go. And as we mentioned, the previous MOU was over 20 years old. This one is brand new, and we'll probably see some gaps and opportunities for refinement as we go. We look forward to coming back to you, both the board and the commission, and discussing how things are going. Be interested in your feedback about what that could look like in terms of frequency. And then also just a note that there is a significant amount of work for ODF in the continuing discussions around the private forest accord. As Jennifer mentioned, DEQ will have a role in that as well. We need to make sure that we do that work to identify those relationships for agencies and the various stakeholders that have been involved and continue to be involved in that process. Next slide. And I guess we're at questions and discussion. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, both Kyle and Jennifer, for this overview. We appreciate it. And I think it's interesting to note that this MOA, after so many years, is coming to fruition here at a time where, as was detailed in the previous briefing, we are ready to see forest practices laws significantly change in short order. And many of those changes are going to be ones that can benefit the kind of work where our interests overlap in regard to water quality in particular. So it was interesting too, in looking at the comments, that some of the folks were kind of addressing those questions, and they wanted to kind of press the agencies on, do forest practices laws or rules provide adequate assurances of water quality standards? And we're right at a time where there's agreement to make changes to those that we expect are going to be really generally beneficial. The other comment I'd just like to make as we are getting ready for our directors to take this next step is, I think a huge thanks needs to be given and recognition given to Commissioner Wade Mosby, our former Commissioner Wade Mosby, who of course spent his long and distinguished career in the forest industries in a variety of capacities. I think knows the industry inside and out, probably knows most of the people on this call, and really helped us all out with his brand of clear and frank wisdom and giving us a real sense of urgency and saying, because in addition to a man who loves the forest and forestries, he's also a fly fisherman, and he was the first to say, I'm a water guy. I'm a water guy. I'm a forestry guy who's a water guy. And he left us with direction of urgency to say that we need to do this work now. We need to do it together. We need to move beyond the old stalemates and ways that we weren't progressing our work. And so I'm just so very pleased and thank everybody here today who's contributed to this, and want to also thank my dear friend Wade Mosby for his inspiration and his direction to get to work and get on it. So thank you, everyone. Who else has a comment or a question for us now? And again, remember, if I'm not seeing you, feel free to speak up. Commissioner Kyle.
It's mostly just a comment, but I just want to express my appreciation for the two agencies working together to update this MOU. I think this is an excellent improvement in the process, and I'm just very supportive of everything that has been accomplished with this. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Director Whitman.
Thank you, Chair George. Thank you so much for recognizing Commissioner Mosby, and we'll make sure that we deliver to him an acknowledgement of really his accomplishment along with the team of others. I also have to say on the Board of Forestry side, Board Member Joe Justice also did a lot of work on this along with Commissioner Mosby. And so thank you to the two of them. They were the liaisons between Board of Forestry and the Environmental Quality Commission. And that's a conversation we need to have about liaisons between our two agencies going forward to make sure we keep that good working relationship. So that was one thing. The only other thing I want to say is just, again, to provide a little bit of context about where we go from here. A lot of the comments that we received in questions that we received are really comments and questions about how we are going to work together as we do these clean water plans called TMDLs. And just a reminder for everybody that we do have a significant load of work coming our collective way on these plans, starting with mid-coast, work in the mid-coast of Oregon, and then moving on to temperature TMDLs really around the state, but starting in the Willamette Basin in particular. And so we're working together right now on the Willamette Mercury TMDL implementation, as was acknowledged by Kyle. And that's a good experience as we go into these other planning efforts that are coming at us very quickly. And for those of you who don't know, this work is urgent. It's urgent because of the status of our fisheries, many of which are still declining toward extinction. And it is urgent because of, on the legal side, we are under a court order to complete these plans on a schedule. And so it's going to be challenging for the agencies to do this work, but we have now a roadmap for how to do it together, how to do it more efficiently that will really help us get through this. So look forward to working with you all in the coming years on these plans. We have other agencies that's been identified, Department of Agriculture. We're going to be having some similar discussions with the Department of Agriculture here in the coming year to lay the foundation for updating our agreement with that agency also. So appreciate the partnership with Department of Forestry and Board of Forestry, and thanks everybody so much for your work on this really important agreement.
Thank you for those good words, Director. I appreciate very much your stressing the sense of urgency. We know that this work has to move forward, and it's felt to some people like we haven't been doing that job as urgently as was needed. And so I hope that what we've done here is identify that both of our departments and our boards and commissions are gonna keep pushing, keep working with a sense of urgency, because we know that Oregon fisheries and Oregon citizens can't wait. Vice Chair Barrasso.
Thank you, Chair George. I just want to similarly thank Jennifer, Kyle, Director Whitman, and most definitely, I mean, Kathleen, you as well, and very much so Wade, former Commissioner Wade Mosby, and Joe Justice. So it's I know that it's taken a good while to get here, and it makes sense that it did, and I can appreciate that for the complexity of the issues and the work that the two agencies do, that it was really important to work through the process, work through this MOU, and develop that clarity across both agencies to support us working effectively with each other, knowing that we both bring valuable perspectives, and having this clarity and this roadmap is going to be important. So with that, I appreciate, Richard, you saw into the fact that now the next steps is getting into it and doing the work. And I know that this foundation was incredibly important to do that and bring that clarity, because we have a lot of issues ahead of us, and it's all coming together. And so just want to thank everyone that's come along this and been part of this and contributed to this, and just want to offer my excitement at seeing this work move forward, because of its potential to address the real issues with our fisheries and bring some clarity for all of us. Thank you.
Board of Forestry Member Chandra.
Yes, thank you. I will just echo the thank you parade here to both departments for the excellent work I think they did on this MOU. And in particular, I wanted to emphasize, I really appreciate that I think there's some really thoughtful changes that were made in this last draft in response to the public feedback and the feedback that you've been hearing from board members and commissioners, particularly around the specificity, the timelines, the commitments, really focusing on the accountability piece and the urgency piece, of course, because at the end of the day, having a great process is a key piece of this, but also we want to see the outcomes at the end of the day, and the accountability will be in showing that this process actually works to move the needle in the right ways, right, in terms of water quality outcomes and all the things that provides. So I think this is a great step, and I really appreciate the flow chart as well. Thank you for thinking of the visual learners out there. I think that's much appreciated. And in terms of timeframes for check-ins, I think would be great to at least have an annual check-in on how collaboration is going. If not, maybe one a little bit more frequently as you guys get off the ground, just to see if there's, things are going smoothly, or see if there's any hiccups or anything like that, or any way that we can help, frankly. So thanks again for all the work. This is a really exciting development.
Thank you. A Board of Forestry member, oh, where'd you go? There you go. Carla Chambers.
Yes, I too want to thank the process and all those involved and all the leadership. And I especially want to call out the private landowners, because they're the ones that financially bear the impacts of this. And it's just, it's disproportionate on who financially pays for this. So I really appreciate their leadership and, really coming to the table and helping make this happen, along with all of us that are involved in a policy role. I also want to call out Senator Blumenthal's comments yesterday with regard to how important it is we get really upstream on the wildfire front, because so many of the things we're dealing with are really externalities or downstream impacts of burning 4 million acres in a period of 6 years. So anyway, just really appreciate this work, the urgency, the leadership it took for everyone involved, and just want to call out the senator's comments on paying for everything downstream is very, very expensive. And it relates to our work here as well.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Yes, thanks, Chair George. First of all, I just want to acknowledge all of the appreciation for the work, and again, reiterate, I think Kyle's remarks earlier about, I think it was and has been a learning experience for both agencies. We are anxious to put it to work. And so I did want to follow up on the conversation about frequency with which we come back to you all. I think it is, we both agree that it's very important to have an accountable and transparent process. And so Member Ferrari, I do think that we would maybe be inclined to target pending board and commission schedules, something coming back in this 6-month-ish range, initially maybe targeting some early summer, depending on when the respective board and commission meeting schedules line up, and then targeting something somewhat annually. After that, we can check in at that point, and maybe set a more specific schedule going forward. But we do agree that having a process that continues and institutionalizes that accountability will be useful to this process. And there's a lot, there's just a confluence of a lot of things right now. So there's the MOU and how that's going to fit with the accord process and those activities. And so there's a lot of TMDLs in the pipeline. There's a lot of work for the agencies to continue to be doing together. And so I think if there's agreement by the commissioners and the board members, that's what we would propose for your consideration.
Thank you. Well, not seeing any other hands. Chair Kelly, do you have anything for us?
Well, all I can do is repeat the many thank yous for everyone involved. I was happy to hear Wade Mosby called out, and certainly Joe Justice. I have a long history working with Wade in a business organization for 10 years together. So yes, there are many cross currents in all of this, and he's always been such a great Oregonian. So this is a big win for Oregon. It's a big win for fish and the rest of our environment. So just we'll repeat the thank you to everyone involved, and Kyle and Jennifer and their staffs in particular. So now our new state forester gets to sign this document and take all the credit as well. So, all right. Thank you all.
Very good. Very good. Good work, Forrester. All right. So I'm scanning. I'm not seeing any other hands. We could go on congratulating one another for another 45 minutes, but I think it's been said. Director Whitman, do you have anything else to finish up this agenda item? I think we're all looking forward to seeing this being implemented and hearing about the work as it goes forward.
Thank you, Chair George, and Board of Forestry members. I really don't have anything else on this item, and we are well ahead of schedule. As you'll note, we, it was hard to anticipate in advance how much more conversation there needed to be, frankly, between the commission and the board. And I think it's a compliment to staff that there really aren't a lot of questions at this point. So with that, Chair George, we have for you all, for the commission, and we're well ahead of schedule. I would actually propose that we go into recess here for a while and come back as scheduled. Actually, for the public portion of our meeting after lunch at 12:15.
I think that is the right thing to do at this time. Again, before we do close this portion, however, I really want to thank all our partners from the Board of Forestry and Kyle and Cal for joining us. I think it is important for us to spend this time together at intervals, and we look forward to continuing to work with you, and I'm going to be cheering you on as you get under work together. So with that, I agree. We will move to take a recess of the Environmental Quality Commission meeting until 12:15 p.m. And so those who are rejoining us, we will see you then. And everyone else, we hope to see you before too long. Take care. Thanks again. We're in recess at 10:14, and when you're ready, Stephanie, please feel free to stop the recording.
Thank you, Chair George.
And Chair George.